Is that fireproof?
Why Brand dominates? Now you're probably thinking that's an easy answer, it's because he has high damage, full stop. But that's only part of the reason. There is much more to the answer than Brand just doing high damage, and this video will give you more information and make you more aware of what's going on in the game. To start off, Brand is usually played in the support role but also sees playtime in the mid lane. With recent changes to his jungle camp damage, he's even played in the jungle. And just to top it off, he can also be played in top lane if you really wanted to. Based off his role variation, you could say he's a strong, versatile champion, but let's find out what really makes him strong and get a better understanding of why Brand is so strong. To find out why Brand is so strong, let's first look at his playability in all elos. Now, in low elo, Brand's playability is through the roof. This is because his lack of mobility will not be punished and his high damage will not be respected, meaning this is the most dominant elo for Brand. So if you're looking to climb out of low elo, I'd recommend having Brand in your pool. In addition to this, players aren't familiar with spacing in this elo, or they may not know or think that spacing is important, which versus long range and high damage champions like Brand, it is super important. Players also aren't familiar with his flash ER slow in combination with his R bounce, which again does high damage. This just adds to his dominance in this elo, and since he's so versatile in terms of roles and won't go punished as much in this elo, he can be played in all positions. However, unfortunately, you have smurfs that are so consistent nowadays which may cause problems for you, so this should be noted. Although, with that being said, this is still his most dominant elo. Onto mid elo, and Brand is still good. He provides high damage and a distraction from other carries like your ADC and mid laners. Let's also not forget about his crowd control, where if you land an ability and then a follow up Brand Q, it will stun the enemy. And CC control is invaluable in any elo. In this elo, Brand may or may not be punished for his zero mobility, depending on if the enemy is good. The bot lane matchup is slightly favored towards Brand just because of him being able to out damage the enemy, unless they've picked champions that are better suited for Brand's range and low mobility. High elo Brand is not played as much due to players being highly aware of spacing and his low mobility, which will be much more likely to be punished in this elo. On top of this, his stun needs two abilities to be hit, where players in this elo will be able to dodge and flash these abilities much better and much more consistently. If you also add players picking high mobility counters in pre-lobby picks, this elo becomes a nightmare for Brand. Overall, Brand is really good in low to mid elo, where he is super dominant in low elo and good in mid elo. Then at high elo, he becomes not as good, but still playable if you wanted to. However, in this elo, it is better to play him in certain matchups or if you're a Brand main, as he will still do damage, cause a distraction, and has a small amount of CC. So being good in 2 out of the 3 elos while still being playable in the third makes elos one of the reasons why he is so strong. Getting onto level spikes. Level spikes are always important when deciding the strength of a champion. Brand is an early game, mid game and late game champion. So this means early levels, mid levels and late leveling all matters on Brand. Brand has a good level 1, usually going W and poking from afar, with W being his most long-ranged ability, and this combined with his passive, which burns players doing extra damage to them, resulting in his level 1 being really good depending on your ability to land his spells. Level 2 Brand is great too, taking Q second to ability combo for his Q stun. Again, how well you do at this level depends on your ability to land his spells. Level 3, he hits a even better combo spike. He gains a short ranged E, which is not a skill shot and basically a guaranteed ability damage. This allows you to combo his spells better while also adding flash pressure combos such as E flash Q. Now on to level 6, which is his real power spike. His ult deals huge damage, and this combined with his 3 ranks in W and passive damage equals Brand doing a hell of a lot of damage and being a problem. Granted, you're able to land most of your abilities. His level 8 gives him max W at this point, doing high damages in the mid game if you're able to land them. This added with his flash E-ult kill pressure gives him great presence in the mid game. So without a doubt, level spikes is definitely one of the reasons that Brand is so strong. Brand's fighting capability strengths also need to be taken into consideration when talking about how strong a champion is. In teamfights, Brand's main priority is to land all his abilities, especially his R to do maximum damage before he dies. You could also add landing his CC a priority, but his CC is actually hard to land if the enemy has not been slowed and you do not have your R. For 1v1s, Brand support is usually good as you won't really be 1v1ing a lot, and even when you are, you will almost always be getting the enemy super low or dead. But for Brand as a mid laner, his 1v1s become more difficult depending on the elo you're in and the champion you're up against, as enemies in higher elo will be ready to flash or use the mobility to get out of your W range, and on top of this, they will always be looking to dodge your Q stun. In bot lane, his fighting capability is great, being able to match almost all long-ranged champions, and although some champions have a ranged advantage like Exaroth, he still has a long-range W and can buy tier 2 boots first to have extra movement speed. This being said, Brand has two weaknesses when it comes to teamfights, and as stated before, they're his mobility and weak CC. Compared to other champion CC, he has to land two abilities to get a stun off, and landing his Q in teamfights is much harder the further up the elo you go. His only consistent CC control is his R slow, which even then only lasts a few seconds and doesn't really affect the enemy that much. This brings us to the conclusion that although Brand has the ability to deal high damage in teamfights, he may instantly die or miss his abilities, and if you add this with having poor CC, he becomes useless in teamfights. So as a result, he is average when it comes to teamfighting and 1v1s, where he shines more in mid to low elo teamfights. He is very capable of winning and carrying fights in this elo if he is not dealt with or known how to be played against. So overall, he is average. Finally, we are now on item spikes, which also determines how strong a champion is, especially if one item can make such a huge impact for the champion. And for Brand, this is definitely the case. Liandry's Anguish is huge on Brand, especially when he's in the support role, giving him extra burn damage and a bigger mana pool to constantly be throwing out W's and Q's. This pressures the enemy and doesn't give them breathing space. Brand can also choose to go sorcery boots first, giving him slightly better mobility, which he lacks, while still providing extra penetration damage. He also has the option to go Zhonya's, which helps out again with his zero mobility, as it will cause problems to champions that are diving him, as once Zhonya'd, they will be surrounded by your team and collapsed on. So if you're constantly getting dived, Zhonya's is highly recommended. If fed enough and keeping up with items, Brand can easily carry games. Although in higher elos, this is not as optimal, as you'd want your ADC to have kills and be able to carry for you while you support. All in all, his items slightly make up for his low mobility or will provide extra damage, which adds to the reason why he's so strong. On top of this, his level spikes and what elo he's played in is where Brand becomes his most dominant. Unfortunately, this video is longer than I intended it, so we'll just have to touch on matchups. Although Brand is long ranged, there are some champions who outrange him, such as Exaroth, and there are high mobility champions like Pyke who Brand struggles with. So for the full list, Google op.gg Brand and click on counters, where you'll find a full list of his win rates and lane kill rates versus those champions.